Picture this. You're sitting in a timber longhouse in 9th century Norway. It is pitch black outside, freezing cold, and the wind sounds like a dying wolf. Inside, the air is thick with wood smoke, roasted pork fat, and the unwashed bodies of 40 warriors who have spent the last 6 months rowing through freezing spray. You have no central heating, you have no Netflix, you have no concept of ibuprofen for the headache you are definitely going to have tomorrow. And then, someone hands you a hollowed-out bullhorn filled with a thick, murky, bubbling liquid that smells like wild pine needles, crushed flowers, and liquid sugar. You take a swallow. It burns. It warms your chest. And suddenly, surviving the brutal Scandinavian winter doesn't seem so bad after all. For centuries, modern pop culture has sold us a very specific image of Viking drinking. Big, hairy guys sitting around tossing back booze, screaming, and, if early 19th century romantic poets are to be believed, drinking out of the human skulls of their vanquished enemies. Which sounds undeniably badass, but it is also completely wrong. So what were the Norse actually drinking when they wanted to get drunk? How strong was it, and why was getting sloshed in a medieval longhouse not just a hobby, but a matter of religious duty, political survival, and cosmic destiny? Put down your horned helmet, which they also didn't wear by the way, and buckle up, because the reality of Viking drinking culture is far weirder, far richer, and much higher stakes than you ever imagined. Let me start by clearing up the most famous myth in Northern history. Did Vikings drink out of human skulls? No. Absolutely not. That whole idea came from a single hilarious mistranslation in 1636. A Danish physician named Old Worm was translating an Old Norse collodic poem called Grakumal. The poem contained the phrase Orebjord kulam hauks, which literally translates to "from the curved branches of the skull," a poetical Norse metaphor for horn drinking. Old Worm misread it and wrote that the heroes drank from the skulls of the slain. The Romantic era ran with it, and a myth was born. Vikings drank from horns, wood, and glass, not human bone. Now that we've cleared that up, what was actually inside those horns? If you were an average Viking living an average life, you were not drinking imported wine every night. You were drinking ale, or øl. Ale was the absolute bloodline of the Norse world. Everyone drank it, men, women, children, elders, and no, they didn't drink it because they were all functioning alcoholics by age 12, they drank it because untreated standing water in medieval Europe was often a biological roulette wheel. Fermenting grain killed off harmful pathogens. Ale wasn't just booze, it was liquid bread and clean water rolled into one. Norse ale was brewed primarily from barley, though rye and oats were sometimes thrown in. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't use hops to preserve or flavor their beer the way modern craft breweries do. Hops weren't widely used in Scandinavia until much later. Instead, Viking brewers relied on a complex mix of wild herbs and botanicals known as grut. They used juniper berries to add a sharp, piney bite. They added yarrow, meadowsweet, and most importantly, bog myrtle, also known as sweet gale. Bog myrtle gave the ale a spicy, herbal kick, but it did something else too. Bog myrtle contains natural compounds that enhance the intoxicating effects of alcohol. It produced a heavy, narcotic, deep body buzz. And in some archaeological digs, like the Firkat ring fort in Denmark, researchers found traces of plants like henbane. Henbane is a toxic, psychoactive herb from the nightshade family. In tiny doses, it causes mild hallucinations, intense heat sensations, and rage. Some historians suspect that herbal brews laced with plants like this might have been what pushed the legendary berserkers into their terrifying, trance-like battle frenzies. So ale was the everyday staple. But what about when a Viking chieftain wanted to flex? What did they drink when they were celebrating a massive raid, marrying off a daughter, or sealing an alliance? They drank mead. If ale was the blue-collar fuel of the Norse world, mead was liquid gold. Mead is made by fermenting honey mixed with water and wild yeast, and in Viking-age Scandinavia, honey was obscenely expensive. Think about it logically. Bees do not thrive in Arctic blizzards. Honey had to be painstakingly gathered from wild hives or imported from warmer regions down south. It was rare, difficult to harvest, and incredibly precious. Because sugar was so scarce, mead was intensely prized. It was strong, sweet, aromatic, and packed in alcohol content anywhere from 10% to 15% ABV, roughly equivalent to a heavy modern wine. Mead was so culturally valuable that the word itself became deeply embedded in our language today. Ever wondered where the word honeymoon comes from? In ancient Northern Europe, a newly married couple was traditionally gifted enough mead, made from honey, to last through one full moon cycle, in the belief it would promote fertility. And then, at the absolute top of the Viking social pyramid, was wine. Scandinavia cannot grow wine grapes. The climate is far too cold. So grape wine had to be raided or traded for from the Frankish Empire, the Mediterranean, or Byzantium. Owning a jug of imported grape wine in 9th century Norway was the ultimate flex. It was the equivalent of pulling up to a tavern in a custom Ferrari. If a jarl poured you a cup of real grape wine, he wasn't just offering you a drink. He was telling you that he was insanely rich and connected to foreign emperors. Now, to truly understand why the Vikings drank the way they did, you have to realize that getting drunk wasn't just a fun Friday night activity. To the Norse mind, altered states of consciousness were intimately tied to the divine. The gods themselves were obsessed with booze. In Norse mythology, the greatest gift in existence isn't a magical sword or a pile of gold. It's the mead of poetry. According to legend, this divine mead was brewed from the blood of a wise god named Kvasir, mixed with honey. Whoever drank it didn't just get tipsy, they were instantly gifted infinite knowledge, perfect wisdom, and the ability to compose brilliant poetry. Odin, the chief god, literally shapeshifted into an eagle and risked his life to steal this divine brew from the giants so he could share it with gods and men. And what happens when a brave Viking warrior dies heroically in battle? They don't go to a quiet, peaceful heaven with harps and clouds. They go to Valhalla, Odin's great hall. And what is waiting for them in Valhalla? A cosmic goat named Heidrun. I am not making this up. The Norse believed that on the roof of Valhalla stood a giant goat named Heidrun that grazed on the foliage of the sacred tree Yggdrasil, and instead of milk, endless streams of high-grade, intoxicating mead flowed continuously from her udders into giant vats to feed the fallen warriors forever. That was the Norse legend of paradise, an eternity of fighting all day and drinking goat mead all night. Back on Earth, drinking was the glue that held Viking society together. But it wasn't a free-for-all. It was governed by strict, high-stakes rituals. The most important of these was a sumbel. A sumbel was a formal, highly structured ceremonial drinking round held inside the chieftain's hall. The chieftain sat at the head of the room. The host's wife, the lady of the hall, would step forward holding a massive, ornate drinking horn filled with mead or spiced ale. She would hand the horn to the highest-ranking guest first. This was crucial. Who got served first established the exact social hierarchy of the room. Being passed over meant you had been downgraded in status. When you received the horn, you didn't just chug it down. You were expected to make 3 distinct toasts. First, a toast to the gods, usually Odin for victory or Freya for a good harvest. Second, a toast to the dead ancestors and heroic fallen warriors. Third, the bragaful, the boast cup. This is where you stood up before your lord, your peers, and your gods, took a massive gulp of mead, and swore a solemn oath or boasted about what great deed you were going to accomplish in the coming year. Here's the catch. In Norse culture, words spoken during a sumbel while holding a sacred drink were woven directly into urth, the fabric of fate itself. You could not make a drunk promise at a sumbel and wake up the next morning saying, sorry bro, the mead was talking. Breaking an oath made during a drinking ritual destroyed your honor forever. It was a social death sentence. Drinking was high-wire political theater where your words could make or break your entire life. And notice who controlled the drink: women. In Viking society, women were the primary brewers and the keepers of the hall. Brewing was viewed as a semi-magical process. You take grain, water, and herbs, leave it in a dark barrel, and it transforms into a bubbling, spirit-altering liquid. Women were seen as guardians of this transformation.
In ancient literature, women like Valkyries aren't just battle maidens. Their ultimate role in Valhalla is serving the sacred cup to heroes. On Earth and in the myths, the woman who held the horn controlled the peace of the hall.
So how do we know all of this isn't just fairy tales written down centuries later? Because modern science and chemical archaeology have backed it up. Archaeologists excavating Viking burial sites across Scandinavia and Britain have unearthed an incredible array of drinking gear. We found silver-mounted cattle horns, bronze cauldrons from Ireland, delicate Rhenish glass beakers imported from Germany, and wooden buckets bound with brass rings. When molecular archaeologists analyze the microscopic crust and residue left at the bottom of these ancient vessels, they find complex chemical signatures: tartaric acid from grapes, beeswax compounds from honey, pollen from meadowsweet and clover, traces of juniper resin, and starch granules from sprouted barley. In a famous Scandinavian gravesite known as the Egtved girl burial, dating even earlier to the Nordic Bronze Age, showing how long this tradition lasted, researchers found a small birch bark bucket at her feet. Chemical analysis revealed it held a complex hybrid beverage made from wheat, cranberry, honey, bog myrtle, and lime blossom. The Vikings weren't just slapping together crude booze in a dirty tub. They were master fermenters. They understood botanical chemistry, yeast ecology, and flavor profiling long before modern science existed. So, what did Vikings drink to get drunk? They drank dark, herbal, piney ales laced with bog myrtle and juniper to get through the day-to-day grind of a brutal northern life. They drank rich, golden, hyper-expensive mead to honor their gods, celebrate their victories, and seal high-stakes political alliances. And if they were wealthy enough, they drank imported Mediterranean wine to show off their power to the world. To the Norse, alcohol was never just a way to numb the cold or escape reality. It was nutrition, it was medicine, it was law, it was political order, and above all, it was a bridge between the mortal world of mud and blood and the hall of the gods waiting high above the clouds. The next time you raise a glass of beer, cider, or wine, take a second to look down into it. You're holding a tiny piece of an ancient, unbroken thread of human culture, a tradition refined by sailors, raiders, and poets sitting in a smoky longhouse 1,100 years ago, staring into the dark, taking a drink, and daring the winter to do its worst. All right, that's enough history for today. I'm going off to find a horn of mead and a heavenly goat. In the meantime, hit that like button, subscribe, and click the next video on your screen. Seriously, just click it. Skål.